Welcome back to Gura. This is episode 6 of my alien project. Now, before we start, I'd like to go over some things. Firstly, yes, I know, this video was supposed to come out, last weekend or the weekend before that. I really don't know, but it was supposed to come out some weekend. And, y'all really did want it to be, but I guess it didn't, which is kind of upsetting, well, at least for me and stuff like that, because I really did want this video to come out this weekend, which was kind of upsetting for me. I really do want to post the videos on the due dates that I plan for them to be uploaded on, but yeah, I guess this one didn't, and it's upsetting. And another thing is the scientific names for the Guran animals. Now, I've been using entirely Latin for the scientific names of all the species, like the purple arbora. That is purple tree in Latin, and it's just pure Latin. However, most scientific names have a bit of Greek and Latin into it. So, from now on, the Guran scientific names will be a mix of Greek and Latin to try and make the world a bit more realistic, because I do want this world to be as realistic as I can make it to be. Because, aliens are pretty cool in my opinion, and how they could adapt to their environments and how different they could be from earthly organisms. So, now, okay, this is obviously not going to be a land episode, as we did in the vote. While our voyage through land is starting off pretty strong, I would say, and how the creatures are diversifying and evolving, sadly, we're not going to be talking about the land in this episode, which I know we just started with the land and now we're already ditching it. Well, don't worry, we'll come back to it in the next episode for a pretty good part and a pretty long time. But from now, we're going to talk about the biomes I don't think has been mentioned yet in Gura so far. And that is none other than the cold Arctic and something else. But first, let's talk the continents. The continents are shifting. Now, Terra has split off into a new island continent. This island continent is called Volva, and Volva is drifting everly close to Laura. Laura has drifted southern and is more towards the equator now than ever, making it a bit more of a tropical, hot environment than last time, while Laura is drifting further and further towards the ice caps, making it a bit more temperate. They will have new, unique, sort of ecosystems to it, and new organisms. So will Volva. It will have unique organisms, different from Longaterra and Terra, which are, still going strong. Also, the swamps that were the main biome are starting to receding. Not as much as the last time, but they're starting to, giving the plains to be growing, as well as the deserts, due to the ice growing and growing through the steady cooling of the planet. This ice has swallowed a lot of the normal open ocean, which has caused many of the native life forms to find themselves here, and begin to diversify inside of the cold oceans, filling in empty niches from plankton blooms. The plankton blooms bloom in the Arctic and thus can attract many animals, creating a whole new Arctic ecosystem, as well as the deep sea. The deep sea is powered by the hydrothermal vents and the bacteria that we discussed in episode 1 and all of their millions of descendants and their great diversity. So, we'll cover those two biomes in this episode of Gura episode 6. The Arctic actually has a pretty diverse array of animals. Most of them are on land, but we're going to be talking about the aquatic life forms, as the ice caps have not connected to the mainland yet, thus meaning that no creatures can cross over. So for now, it's only going to be full of aquatic creatures, basically. So, why don't we just, dive down into the chilly depths to see what's thriving down there. So, what could you think would be thriving in the North and South Pole of the cold, cold Arctic? As far as we know, most creatures could not adapt, because if all creatures on Compolus, or no, sorry, not Compolus, Gura, hope I haven't been saying that, sorry for that, I've just had it on my mind recently, but Gura, hope I haven't said Compolus at all yet, but Gura, what do you think could be there on the ice caps? Most species have been ectothermic or cold-blooded, so how could they adapt to the coldness without freezing over and dying? Well, underneath the giant icebergs and ice that's floating beneath, something is brewing below the cold, cold ice caps. Near the sea floor of the Arctic is the Frutex gluteus. The Frutex gluteus is a very, very strange plant. Their open ocean ancestors began to adapt to the cold water as their territory kept on getting occupied by the ice, and now have adapted into these odd plants. These plants are somewhat similar to that of an underwater shrub, but here in the Arctic, they fill the niche of river weeds, or ocean weeds, sorry. They have a thick stem that is very woody, similar to their cousins which adapted onto land. They have a similar two leaves that are very dark for gathering all of the sunlight that they need in order to photosynthesize and reproduce with spores with their spore blossom, and very long roots to extend down into the soil to suck up any nutrients they can from the very odd soil down below in the Arctic. You can find them in great colonies in the deep sea, or not deep sea, the Arctic Sea. Well, it's technically the deep sea as well. So, they are very, very much the dominant plant in the Arctic. Well, at least for now. Which, well, that's pretty good for these beautiful, beautiful plants. Another plant, which actually has a very unlikely ancestor, but it does. This is the Cryocarpus. The Cryocarpus is a very tall plant for underwater. Now, you might think it's descended from the very stalk-like bamboo plants of the open ocean. However, it's not. These bright orange bulbs that are fleshly and protruding from each of the two long stems are actually fruit. These fruit mean that it's descendant from the reef counterparts that have been cultivated by many species. While the cultivators stick to the fruits in the reefs, have not moved out into the open ocean to cultivate these new plants, these Cryocarpus have been adapting into the Arctic waters. They've grown taller, and instead of growing one fleshy fruit, they've grown multiple fruits. These multiple fruits are a very, very nice thing for herbivores. Bright orange with yellow spots to attract herbivores and allowing them to disperse their seeds to their excrement. So, they can spread like rapid fire throughout the cold Arctic. Well, seasons are indefinitely on Gura, except they're not as harsh, but they're still there. Seasonal variation can cause them to not grow their fruits during the cold winter months. However, once it comes by summer, they are going to pop up again. Most likely because the fruits are a bit vulnerable to cold temperatures and will likely die if not eaten first. So, it's very, cool. Now, some other things are thriving beneath these cold, cold, cold seas. This is the Bulba purpura. The Bulba purpura is a very strange type of plant. Their ancestors can be traced all the way back to episode 1, actually, with Guran algae. Guran algae is very diverse and is very similar to that of earthly algae. It's clumpy and matty and photosynthetic. However, this new type of algae is a little bit different than its mats that float up in freshwater and saltwater habitats. These bulla purpura are very similar to that of the bubble algae of Earth. Very, very similar. And since they're so similar, through convergence, I guess, they're actually comprised of a single cell. That's right, they are a single-celled organism. Very similar to that of the bubble algae, which are also a single-celled organism. They're the largest single-celled organism on Gura yet. And they grow on ice caps and deep below on the seabed in very mass colonies. They are very abundant, only being outcompeted by the Futex glydius. So they're the second most abundant, and can somewhat be a sort of pest, if you will, because of their over-colonization, which could cause a bit of toxins in the sea. However, they're most likely going to be dealt with by herbivores, so you don't have to worry about them too much. Yet. So, even single-celled photosynthesizers are thriving within the Arctic seas, because, well, why wouldn't they be? I mean, single-celled organisms are everywhere on Gura. So, yeah, that's very, very nice. Now, the first animals we're going to be talking about in the Arctic seas are the glidiostomatid. The glidiostomatid is, obviously, a descendant of the webbed mouths from the open oceans, and now have spread into the cold, cold Arctic. Now, with this, they've actually become, due to the overabundance of plankton, they have become the largest life form on Gura so far, being very, very big and weighing about 5 tons. They are massive and packed full of blubber. Now, webbed mouths on the open ocean were ectothermic, meaning that they're cold-blooded, and were probably only about 15 or so feet long, or maybe even some of the larger individuals being 20 feet long. That's pretty big, but it's not as big as the glidiostomatid. Now, though they were cold-blooded, they swam near the equator oceans, meaning that they could regulate their body temperature with the surrounding heat, so they could stabilize it and keep on pushing. However, in the coldness, the glidiostomatid has developed. Because of their large sizes, it also helps with gigantothermy, similar to elephants. And this gigantothermy has also led to them becoming endothermic, similar to mammals. So, they are warm-blooded and swim through the water. Another thing is reproduction. Now, while these creatures are very similar to whales, they also have a very similar reproductive strategy to whales. Not too similar, because these are aliens and not mammals, so it's a bit different. The reproductive strategy comes from, well, the original webbed mouths, which simply laid their egg sac through the deep sea and kept on swimming, having no parental care instincts what sorts of effort, meaning that the larvae, once hatched, would have to dodge dangerous predators, which swam around in the oceans until they matured enough to grow up and become large, meaning that they've had multiple young in order to make sure that they survive till adulthood. However, these creatures only have one calf. This calf must be protected by the adults, thus resulting into parental care. However, the babies would probably need to build up the blubber that they need to survive, because these creatures have a lot of blubber, and this blubber is thick, allowing them to insulate better in the cold water. This may also happen with their babies. Now, near those segment fins, which are used to help the baby be born, which their babies are now born with oviparous, these fins are sort of vestigial and not really used to keep the egg sac in regular positions so they can be laid somewhere. Instead, near their fins are tiny little nipples. Now, you already know what nipples are for, and it's exactly what they're for here on Gura. They're here to excrete milk. This milk-like substance comes from a second sort of sac from their two stomachs, which produces the food that they eat into milk. This emerged from, of course, a sort of primitive stomach near the two stomachs, which is among all of the tripod's descendants, two stomachs. This sac then eventually became into a milk processor that produces the milk and pushes it to the nipples, allowing their baby to build up enough fat and blubber in order to grow. Alien fish milk. Tasty. And so, the glidiostomatid are thriving in the cold water, protecting their babies, and, just thriving. Sometimes even singing to their babies to keep them calmed down and not over hyper when drinking the milk. Take a listen. Which is very interesting. In convergence with many of the squishy foot's descendants on land, they have developed their fibers to fuse in with muscles so they can create sounds internally instead of using their primitive bristle sounds, which is advancement, I guess. And they can also travel in pods, similar to whales, to help protect their calves and themselves even more from the open, cold ocean's predators a lot more effectively. So, the glidiostomatid are thriving in the cold water. But if a creature this big is worried about predators to the point where they have to travel in pods, what predators could be after them? Well, it might be an unlikely creature that you probably wouldn't expect, but they have filled up the niche of apex predator. It's these guys, the intelligent critters of the reef. They are intelligent enough to build complex social dynamics and social bonds with certain other of their species and build them complex mating rituals similar to bowerbirds. However, since their parts of their home have been claimed by the open ocean and their curiousness leading them to it, they've adapted to fill in the apex predator since the bone sharks were too late to get here. So they got here first and filled in the empty niches, thus becoming, well, of course, the apex predator. This is the Glaciungus. The Glaciungus is a very, very, very strange and almost creepy looking creature. Now, they have still adapted to fill in the apex predator niche. Their trunk, the claw on their trunk jaw has become longer, robust, and more serrated, somewhat similar to the claws of many crustacean arthropods of Earth, which can be used to grab and crush bones with ease, and also to hold down their prey while they eat them. They have turned their social behavior into pack hunting in packs similar to the bone sharks. These packs are coordinated with their bristles. Take a listen. They coordinate this in order to hunt. And then, their molar-like teeth of their ancestors have become thinner and serrated all the way down, almost like that of a saw, to cut through flesh like that. And with their increased vision, they can see very far. They've basically taken up the niche of a shark, with also counter shading allowing them to hunt through the cold water. Which is, kind of scary. Similar to the glidiostomatid, they face a problem, which is thermoregulation. However, they've developed blubber and are big enough to experience gigantothermy, meaning that similar to the glidiostomatid, they are also warm-blooded and can regulate their body temperature to however they like. Now, as far as babies go, babies also do not have blubber, so very similar to the glidiostomatid, they may produce milk with simple nipples through their strange fins near their tail. So, their babies can build up enough blubber in order to survive and thrive and learn how to hunt with the pack, which is, kind of scary. These creatures are so far the apex predator of the Arctic, and certain pack members will isolate a younger or older glidiostomatid or a sick individual. Then, once they separate them from the rest of the pod, they will begin to slash at them with their long claws and pin them down, and as well as biting them with their saw-like teeth, cutting them up and causing them to bleed, which This results in more damage and quicker death. However, the freshwater variants of the squishyfoot may begin to adapt back into the saltwater environments. While many variants will still stick to the freshwater, some variants may be pushed towards the Arctic yet again. And once they are pushed to this area, they may find some niches there, which can lead into some unique things. This is the Glaciops. The Glaciops is a very pretty large animal. These animals are descendants of the river squishyfoots. Now, these creatures look a little unique, and they somewhat resemble familiarity, like they seem familiar from creatures mentioned in episode 5, and that's through convergent evolution. You see, their back pairs of limbs, which would add up to 8, are now vestigial and act sort of like gonopods, used for holding egg sacs and as well as keeping them in line during mating. These gonopods keep their egg sacs warm because these animals have also developed endothermy with convergence, so they are warm-blooded and also have thick blubber. However, the blubber is unique. Once the babies are hatched, they're not like larvae. Most species on Gura descendant from the riverfoots on land and in the water have larvae, similar to amphibians. Their larvae are tadpole-like and feed upon basically anything they can find. However, their babies are not larvae. Instead, they're fully hatched infants once they hatch out of their egg sacs from within their gonopods, which is nice. Once their babies hatch, they'll father their mother and build a strong personal bond with their mother, keeping near them and hiding underneath their legs, or sometimes even crawling on their back just to be playful. Now, the mother may feed her babies the necessary proteins in order for great fat in order to grow up, not with really milk, but regurgitating food within their mouth, which this specialized substance that we'll dub crop milk, similar to what some species of birds do. However, it's a little different because it has very specialized proteins in order to build up blubber. These will help the babies grow blubber. So this is not necessarily milk per se, but it's vomit with fat proteins in it that allow babies to get fatter so they can survive, which is kind of nasty. Now, looking at one of these creatures' tails, you can see it's got a lot of fat in it. It's not fat, that's pure muscle. Now, on the ends of these are sharp hairs. They're no longer really hairs, they're more like quills. These quills are somewhat similar to a porcupine's quills, used for deterrence, and are very, very sharp. However, unlike a porcupine's quills, their quills, or spines, do not detach from their skin. Instead, they stay in there, and are only used to whack and bash predators that attempt to swim around and grab them, so they can swiftly whack them with their tails. If a tail spike does get dislodged from the flesh, it will usually grow back, and is made out of thick keratin and chitin mixture, which is sharp. And for protection, very similar to most species we've been talking about today, they travel in groups. However, these groups are a little different. Their groups are actually harems. These harem groups are derived of multiple females and usually one male and a smaller adolescent male. The babies also are with their mothers, or calves. So, this is usually what a typical harem of these species look like as they're traveling through the Arctic waters, searching for food like Frutex gluteus, Cryocarpus, and Bulia purpura. They're not picky on what they eat, and they may even scavenge off of rotting carcasses if it comes to that. making them facultative herbivores. So, we can see that some species are also still thriving. These animals, by the way, I forgot to mention, have a semi-sprawled stance. So, it's very nice what these creatures are doing in the cold water. And who knows? Maybe they could diversify into something different in the Arctic water. Or maybe not. Who knows? But so far, they're doing relatively well. Best not get near a harem with the male being dominant. He may whack you. Which, painful. So, that is nice for the glaciopops, which, is nice. However, another creature is slowly swimming above them as they lumber through. This is the Paleoepidus. I'm pretty sure I pronounced that right. Probably not, but the Paleoepidus is a very unique looking creature. They don't have a tail fluke because their ancestors did not have a tail fluke. Their ancestors in the shallow seas eventually found themselves in the Arctic, and once they did, they began to adapt, filling in niches. They did not change their ectothermic lifestyle. Instead, they still retained it, still being cold-blooded. Except now they have a very, very low metabolism. This metabolism is so low, it could be considered like that of the Greenland shark of Earth. And because of that, you already know the Greenland shark, he lives for a long time, up to 500 years, with antifreeze proteins in their blood as well. And a similar thing may happen to the Paleoepidus. Now, these creatures may develop antifreeze proteins in their blood to help aging slower, but also makes their flesh toxic, meaning that if a predator eats them, they're going to be poisoned and are going to probably die, making them poisonous. So most predators know not to attack them. And since they have such a slow metabolism, they don't even swim very fast, with a swim speed of only 3 miles per hour, with a top speed of no more than 10 miles per hour at the fastest, and only in short bursts, making them very slow and sluggish. And with this low metabolism, they can live up to 485 years. That is the longest lifespan of any Guran life form so far, which is unique. Most individuals reach sexual maturity at around 200 years old, which is, strange, meaning they grow up very, very slow. Their larvae also have the antifreeze proteins in their blood, meaning that once they're born via ovipositor, they can just swim along very slowly as well, scavenging and eating even plants, meaning that the larvae are omnivores. However, once they get towards an adult, they will only really scavenge off of anything, feeding on the dead corpses that litter down near the colder parts of the sea, meaning that the Paleoepidus are thriving, which is very odd because they're kind of slow and sluggish down here. However, while the bone sharks were outcompeted from the predatory apex predator niche of the Arctic, even though they've mostly filled those niches in any aquatic environment, they didn't for this time. So, but they still can feed in the niche of a predator. This is the Orthognathus. The Orthognathus is a somewhat cute looking critter. Now, the Orthognathus has also experienced a form of convergence, their bristling hairs infused with muscles inside of their body, meaning that they make low, deep, guttural growls. These low growls are mainly used to scare off any rivals from their territory or anything else. Now, I already know what some of y'all are probably thinking. Jordan, this is obviously some sort of alien orca. And also, what's with the creature's jaw? Well, you see, their jaw has converged on earthly vertebrates. Most Guran life forms have a three-part jaw, with smaller mandible jaws near the bottom and a long trunk jaw down the middle. Some of the eel-like descendants of the tripod worms are a bit different. However, most Guran life forms have what we call a trunk jaw. Now, the Orognathus does not have this. Instead, they have convergently evolved a jaw, which this jaw is very similar to that of a snake. Webbing fused in with muscles, becoming the lower part of the jaw, and their upper jaw, trunk jaw, fused together within the multiple segments, thus making it not be able to move. Thus meaning that the Orognathus's jaw looks very similar to that of a snake's jaw, and has also fused in some vertebrae near the lower part of the jaw, making them very stiff. So their jaws are very similar to snakes. This means that they can also swallow prey whole by unhinging their jaw. Scary. And they can kill prey by biting and then swallowing them whole, like a snake. They've also got two-part teeth. The first pair of teeth are sharp and razor-like with serrations to cut through the prey and swallow them whole. However, if the prey is still alive when they're being cut and swallowed whole, the back pair of teeth are long and hook-like, meaning that the prey have a difficult time trying to swim back out the mouth, which is kind of scary. They also, seemingly, produce a specialized crop milk for their babies, similar to the Glaciops. So, this crop milk is from their kills, and similarly, builds up some blubber within their flesh, so they can stay warm. Now, these creatures obviously look like killer whales of Earth with similar eye spots. However, these eye spots are not meant to be false eyes like in that of the killer whale, but instead, they are something different. In the flesh of these eye spots, as they're called, but they're not really eye spots, they're just spots, are specialized cells that can change color. Now, this color is not as complex as, say, a cephalopod, like an octopus or cuttlefish, but it is very similar to that of a tilapia fish's skin that can somewhat change color. It's more similar to that. Their sudden change of color can actually confuse predators, somewhat them trying to understand what is happening and if this is necessarily a good thing to hunt. This could give the Orognathus time to escape, as they are very swift and agile. Now, they mate for life, so they do not split up when they mated, and will take care of their babies throughout multiple generations, which is kind of sweet for the Orognathus. And, well, they're thriving in these cold waters. So, yeah, they're kind of cool. Now, let's leave the cold waters for a bit and clamber on to the ice caps and ice glaciers out here. It's very cold, and you probably wouldn't expect to see life, as, well, no land animals can migrate here because the ice is not yet connected to the land. So, why are we going up here? Well, it's because there is some animals that have began to do something odd. They began to crawl up on the land, which is very odd, as most Arctic animals came from a land-dwelling animal, but not these creatures. They are coming from the sea straight up onto the ice, or land, as it can be called, which could lead into some cool things, perhaps in the future. But what could be up here? This could be up here. This is the Glacioprecursor. The Glacioprecursor is a very strange-looking creature. Now, they also have a very odd ancestor. And their ancestor was, well, something odd. Now, these creatures are very similar to earthly seals, and that they will spend their time swimming in the water, mainly to hunt and eat things. However, once they are done eating, they will probably go up on land or the ice, not really the land, but somewhat land, to sort of bask in the sun. Even though they're warm-blooded, it can still help them get warm, I guess. And that's nice. They have very long, strong, muscular front limbs, allowing them to jump and hop through the ice, and fat bellies allowing them to slide, and vestigial back pairs of fins that are not really that of necessary. And they also do not have a dorsal fin, even though they're actually a type of bone shark, which is odd. Now, what kind of bone shark? They are descendant from the reef-dwelling bone sharks that disguise themselves as the seabed. Eventually, once they find that their homes are shrouded by ice, they begin to swim up and grow up on the ice, finding that it is safer from the large, scary predators more. And they were right. They can evade predators and stay up on land for a long time. Even though they have gills, these gills could act as a pseudolung, retaining water for many, many hours, allowing them to stay up there for around 3 hours, which is pretty long. They also live in social groups. These social groups could contain up to 10 individuals, and they nurture and take care of each other and make sure that, well, everyone's doing okay in the group. And they also, due to them coming up on land, have internalized their bristles, so they make little chirping sounds, which is kind of cute. Take a listen. Oh, they're pretty cute looking. Now, their sort of vestigial fins have been internalized into very odd reproductive parts that sort of act like a placenta, that of mammals, which is, not really a placenta because these are obviously not mammals, but it acts like a sort of womb for the babies to grow, meaning that, yeah, they do not reproduce with oviviparity like you might expect, but they actually actively give birth to live young. That is, weird, because they give nutrients to the babies with a sort of internal milk with inside of it. That is something else. And they give birth to one to two babies, which is odd. However, while they are thriving up on the ice, it doesn't mean that their main predator, the Orothonathus, will find a way to get to them and jump out of the water and grab them. It seems that this troop was unlucky enough to find themselves being attacked by a predator. Now, this is a very interesting step in Gura life, as it could mean a whole new divergence of land creatures may adapt, separate from the land creatures we've been talking about now, which could lead into some cool things, perhaps, in the future. Perhaps. Now, let's talk about this little guy. This is the Subgelidius. The Subgelidius is, a very odd-looking creature, but it's still a creature. Now, you might be wondering, Jordan, where's the background? You promised you'd draw a background for all Guran animals. Where's the background? I don't see a background. All I see is white. Where's the background? Well, the background would be a bit weird for these creatures because of their counter shading. Now, their counter shading might seem weird. The white is on the top, and the dark is on the bottom. Counter shading is usually reverse. So why is their counter shading different? Well, you see, it's because of them, well, you probably wouldn't believe it, or you probably would, because these are aliens, not creatures on Earth, but they are upside down. They walk beneath the ice using suction cup-like feet in order to slowly maneuver across the ice. And with some of their eyes angled on top of their heads, well, technically below, or it's sort of awkward, to see if swimming animals are beneath them, and eyes angled forward to see what they're hunting. That's right, they're a predator. Now, they hunt small animals that thrive down underneath the ice. Now, their feet have developed suction cups very similar to that of a cephalopod, allowing them to slowly maneuver across these, chilly cold waters. Now, they have also developed a sort of parental care. Once their babies are hatched out, the babies will crawl up on their belly to stay warm and to not sink down below and not attach themselves to the ice eventually, which is nice. Now, their beaks are very strong and are designed for pecking. They can deliver strikes of pecking with that of a bullet. That's right, a bullet. Meaning that they could peck through glass with ease if they wanted to, because it's similar to a low gun. Not a very strong gun, but it's still a gun. And that's painful. So, they can crack ice, which can allow them to make homes, and the shells of their prey. Shells. This is the cryostracon. The cryostracon is a sort of odd-looking creature. Now, they're also a strange turtle of Gura, the Giran turtles, as they're called, which have representatives on land as well as the ocean. Now, these guys have, similar to their ancestors, which didn't have back pairs of legs, instead it was more of like a snail foot. Their front pairs of limbs are now used for manipulating items and allowing their beak to manipulate items. Now, okay. Since these creatures are very similar to an underwater snail, and their ancestors actually had algae cells within their shell, basically allowing them to do photosynthesis, kind of like the sea sheep of Earth, they can no longer do this. So, man, that's sad. But still, their ancestors still exist and are in the shallow water, still photosynthesizing. These guys can no longer do that. Instead, they feed on bola purpura that grow on top of the ice, which is their main diet. However, if they're lucky enough, they can probably find a small bit of flesh dangling down from below, which is odd, but it's not very uncommon, which is odd. But they can still do it, and can retreat back in their shells when the striking pecks of the subjurlidius does it. Their shells are strong enough to withstand about 5 pecks before eventually it breaks, which could cause them enough time to probably dig, as the creature, the subjornathus, or subjordius, needs to, save up a little bit of more energy before the next blow, so it could give them somewhat time to burrow into the ice. However, it's hard to do this. So, they have developed a rapid clicking sound with their beak, which can sound very, very scary, and a thud with their shell. This together can sound very scary and can intimidate some of the predators into hesitating before they attack. Take a listen. Which, could probably scare me too. So, these strange snail-like creatures are adapting and thriving with, crawling underneath the ice, as well as their predators. However, one of the strangest creatures are still lumbering beneath all of this in the darker parts of the cold Arctic Ocean. This is the Aleobestius. The Aleobestius is a very, very strange creature, and it might not look like it, but they are actually tube bodies. Now, more specifically, they're more like the The two bodies have pupa that can somewhat drift on the current and act as sort of plankton. However, some of these pupa became larger and larger and began to actively swim, but they also began to work together with closely related groups, thus resulting into these odd creatures. The Aleobestia is a colonial organism, which is not heard of yet on Gura, but now it is. Now, they're very similar to a jellyfish and live in colonies. The main body has the main organs, the heart, the stomach, the nerves, the systems for, stuff. And they're also very complex to body because they actually have a brain in their main body, which is, nice for the two bodies. Well, their land representatives have brains as well as their worm ones, but, other than that, none of them really have brains. They're more considerable to that of coral. However, these guys do have brains. And then there are the leg bodies. The leg bodies have large tubes and are the only parts that actively have a mouth. These mouths are used to gather up marine snow and dead carcasses that they walk upon and just sort of suck them up. And then, give the nutrients off to the rest of the body since their organs are sort of fused into one another. And another type is on the belly of the main body. These are the poison darters, and the poison darters are highly venomous, similar to a black mamba. And when the main threat is deterred, the fighters of the colony will jet out and begin to rapidly stab and puncture, injecting their venom into the animal that has disturbed them, making them actually highly aggressive animals that you do not want to stay by. And their blood is actually purple, which is a very unique color for blood, at least for Gura life so far. And they also have developed simple light-sensitive cells and their pupa into active compound eyes similar to many insects, which is nice. So, these large creatures, since they all have sort of fused bodies, each part of a body has reproductive organs, and they release gametes that actively avoid related gametes as not caused inbreeding. So, they reproduce still with broadcast spawning, except for the main bodies, which still reproduce sexually, which is new among some two bodies, except for the worm two bodies and the land representatives. They reproduce sexually. However, it's sort of iffy. Their colonial is very odd, so we might talk about some of their descendants in the future, because it's very interesting. They don't really broadcast spawn, but once they've all fertilized, they can join together into a main sac, and during their development stage, they all fuse together into a baby. This is a very interesting life cycle, and I may make a video about it in the future. Let me know if I should do that. So, you now have the first colonial organisms on Gura, the Aleobestias, which is, nice. However, swimming through the water, feeding among plankton and whatever they can find, like bola, purpura, and whatever, and plankton, is the cryospermnose. The cryospermnose is, a very strange looking little creature. The cryospermnose are swift and have taken up the niche of, Guran krill. However, similar to krill, they live in social groups. These large social groups swim in vast droves and swarms. However, these swarms are actually work underneath a hive mind. That's right, a hive mind, which is unique among Guran life forms, at least for now. These hive minds mean that these creatures are eusocial. This could be very similar to builder shrimp on Earth, which build colonies together because they're somewhat eusocial. At least that's what I've heard. Now, these creatures have taken up their eusociality, The species, or the ones that you see swimming around in the vast swarms, collecting plankton and food, are called the workers. The workers collect all this stuff and bring it back to the colony, which forms their colonies in ice. Once this happens, inside is the small drones. The drones are the only males, and their only job is to mate with the female. The drones also take care of the eggs inside of the colony that is driven in ice. Then there are the soldiers. The soldiers are also sent out with the workers. The soldiers are a bit more equipped and can attack and fight off any species that are attempting to attack with sharp serratings on their exoskeleton, which can help them cut, and can usually disorient species because they usually target the eyes, causing the species that are attacking them to get a bit disoriented at first, making them a bit more resilient than krill. And then there is the queen. The queen does not move. Instead, relies on swift movements by the drones moving through to keep her gills nice in movement, which is strange. Now, these creatures are very different from their freshwater ancestors. Very different. And, well, they're eusocial now, unlike their ancestors, which were not eusocial. And they're primarily fed on by the glidiostomatid, which is to be expected, as they'll definitely not turn up a swarm of these creatures, as it can provide nutrients. However, it could be quite of a bugger when the warriors are attacking your eyes. So, just close your eyes or, swallow them up. They're bigger, so they'll provide more nutrients. However, looking on the flesh and blubber of the glidiostomatid, you can find a very strange creature. The Gladius amaticans, or amaticus, the Gladius amaticus is a very strange creature. Now, they are descendant of the Ceta. The Ceta is also adapted to the Arctic waters with their new hosts. Now, they're very similar to that of ocean barnacles. The barnacles, which already have somewhat open ocean representatives on Gura, have now developed Arctic representatives on Gura, which is, you just can't escape them. They have a suction cup that clings to the flesh of the glidiostomatid, allowing them to stick onto them while they filter feed out plankton with their bristles, allowing them to filter feed. And if they are attacked, they can withdraw in their shell and release a pungent stench that smells terrible, which can deter some of the predators, which is, nice. Now, as reproduction goes, their eggs may freeze within the water, so their eggs are laid to stick onto the bodies of the glidiostomatid, and once this happens, the eggs will then hatch out into larvae, which swim along and filter feed as well with the parents until they eventually grow a shell and mature into adults, which, weird. You can't escape from barnacles apparently on Gura, which is horrible. Now, that was a bit of a weird end for the Arctic with the Gladius amatis, which, there's not much to say about them. However, let's leave the Arctic for now, and let's delve down into the depths of the Giran Ocean. What is thriving down there in the dark oceans of the cold darkness of the sea? It's very flat and full of strange sand and marine snow and bacterial mats. It's odd. So let's see what's thriving down here in the weirder parts of the deep sea. Plants. Though most sunlight cannot penetrate down far enough to reach the deep sea, some plants may begin to have representatives here, except their solutions are a bit odd. Introducing the Imbiu abiolungus. The abiolungus is okay, it's a very odd plants, I don't know. Now, their descendants, or no, not descendants, but their ancestors were indeed plants. They were the stalk-like bamboo plants of the open ocean. But now, they don't look like bamboo that much. Obviously, they do not do photosynthesis, but instead in their leaves are symbiotic chemosynthetic bacteria, meaning that these now do chemosynthesis instead of photosynthesis. Now, their leaves. Their leaves are no longer used for chemosynthesis. While they still have chemosynthetic cells incorporated in their cells, it's not like too much, not as the main leaves. Instead, these new leaves are used as mouths. These mouths are somewhat similar to the Venus flytrap's leaves, making them the second group of carnivorous plants on Gura, besides the other ones, which actually have representatives on land, which is cool. Now, tipped on these plants are long whiskers. These whisker-like plants detect movement of prey that touches them when they're curious about the strange stench that they produce. And this causes them to suck in water and clamp down their jaws to then begin the digestive process. And they oftentimes set up camp near hydrothermal vents to allow their chemosynthetic bacteria to get to work, as well as to attract small species into getting caught in their death traps. However, hydrothermal vents are unstable and can erupt. When this happens, they'll need to survive. So at the bottom, besides their tuber, which is used to store nutrients and has a very thick casing to protect it from being eaten, are long red leaves. Or not leaves, but roots. These roots will detach from their nutrient sucking portion and do something odd. They shuffle and walk to a safer spot. Now this is very, very odd. And you might be thinking, Jordan, that's not possible. So, what's not possible? How are they able to do that? Well, that's actually pretty possible, because there is a plant on Earth that can do the same thing. Yeah, the same thing. It's called a walking palm. And they use their long roots to sort of shuffle away, moving sand, sort of moving the plant slowly across the deep sea, searching for a new hydrothermal vent to set up shop. And they can usually detect if the hydrothermal vents are getting unstable before they explode. So they can detect it before it does. And get out of there before they burn. Because they're definitely not fast at all. But it's still very, very good for a plant now on Gura. Like I said, very similar to that of the walking palm of Earth. So, that's, nice. However, another species is slowly crawling through the deep of the sea. And this creature is the Bathypedius. The Bathypedius is a very large, well, a relatively large species. Now, they're most closely related to the, well, you'll never know. Just kidding, I'll talk about it later. But they most convergently evolved with that of the tripod fish, and they use their long, spindly legs to walk great distances underwater, searching for whale falls, carcasses, or anything that else is of interest for them, which means that they can walk for miles. And like I said, you might be wondering, well, what are they related to, or closely related to? Well, it's the subgluteus of the Arctic that stick underneath the ice. And they similarly have flat feet. While their feet does not have suction cups on it, it's flat and can allow them to slowly splat and move through the deep seas. They have very poor vision, so they mainly rely on the sense of smell to find the food that they are looking for, which is usually rotting carcasses. Which does not sound like appetizing, but it's appetizing for the Bathypedis. This, also moving through the abyss of the deep sea, is the Abyssus bestia. The Abyssus bestia is another very strange creature. They are closely descendant from the Arctic variants that still do exist, and now they have representatives in the cold deep sea. These deep sea variants no longer travel in harems, but they do still thrive. They have thick, semi-sprawled limbs, allowing them to slowly maneuver through the colder parts of the deep sea. They also similarly have very poor vision and do not rely on their vision much, instead rely on their sense of smell to find most stuff. They also similarly take care of their babies, however, it's to a certain extent, as if they get hungry enough and resources are not available, their babies will indeed get eaten, which is scary. So they're not the best parents, but will still give off their crop milk once they have it. However, it's only to a certain extent sometimes, and it's not only guaranteed to work. In order to keep their babies safe for the crushing pressure for most of their lives, they've internalized their gonapods to sort of keep their babies safe and used to the pressure once they're born, which is odd, but it still works. And similarly, they do not have very big bones, and their bones that they do have are hollow, so they can still maneuver through the deep sea, and they do not have bones in their legs, so they're very flat. Actually, take that back. I don't think they really would have a semi-sprawled posture. Instead, they'll most likely have a sprawled posture because of the crushing weight of the deep sea, except for the Bathypedius, which have very sturdy legs. Except for these guys. They don't have those. However, they're still maneuvering through the deep sea and take on the role as small opportunistic generalist. Well, somewhat similar to the Bathypedia, which are mainly scavengers. However, they don't really actively compete with each other, as that's not really going to be good if you're in the deep sea, as you could waste up too much resources and energy to do so. So they could probably go extinct if that happens. So it's most likely not going to happen. However, another strange little critter is scuttling across. The Photoscotus is a very strange creature. Now, at first you might be thinking, oh, well, the Riverfoot's got another descendant in the deep sea. Well, no. This is actually descendant from the open ocean variant. That's right, the open ocean variants now have a descendant in the deep sea. And, well, they're thriving within the deep sea. The deep sea variants are a bit weird. They have very big eyes, so they can suck up as much sunlight as they can that sort of pierces, but not really. So they can see very, very well in the single dimmest ray of light that may be down there. However, they also have another sense. Some of the hairs that they used to have became internalized and sort of fused towards their jaw, and they became something. They became electrical sensing organs. These electrical sensing organs near their mouth allows them to detect slow electrical pulses in the deep sea, which is very strange. It's somewhat similar to a lateral cord of many species of aquatic organisms on Gura, but not really quite. Now, these special arches in their thing that can sort of sense electrical pulses is used for hunting. While they can't generate a shock, they use it to search for their prey. Their prey usually hides underground, or underground in the deep sea, and they use this to detect the nervous system of their prey. Once they do, they'll quickly dig them out and eat them. This also somewhat makes them very similar to a platypus, which, I mean, they kind of look like, but not really. So deep sea Guran platypus? No, not really. So these strange little creatures have also developed elongated, almost worm-like body with basically no bones. But they still have bones, but not really. But they use this to slowly slink into the burrows of their prey and sense them out, which is pretty scary. So, these odd creatures are adapting in the deep sea. However, another species adapted to the deep sea is the Scotorhyetus. The Scotorhyetus is a very odd creature. Now, the Scotorhyetus has developed something that only the reef-dwelling tube bodies have developed. Not photosynthesis, I wasn't going to say that, but bioluminescence. These bioluminescents adapted from specialized skin cells, and now are used to glow in bioluminescence, which could be very similar to many deep-sea life forms, which exhibit many forms of deep-sea glows. These animals do too. They have specialized ones near their sides. These ones are used for illuminating the surface, and also can be flashed voluntarily and turned off. This could be used for communication which can help them a lot for communication, flashing different pulses in different ways, sort of like a form of Morse code in a way. However, the ones underneath their eyes are in more fleshier bags, not really skin cells, but more like bags underneath their eyes. These, instead of having specialized skin cells, are full of bioluminescent bacteria that they've developed a symbiotic relationship with. These are used for mating rituals. Males are usually the ones that have it. However, females can use it in order to help them with communicating with the male, even more than the normal ones on the sides. So they have very complicated sort of mating things when it comes to bioluminescence. And every single night, once the sun sets above the deep sea, they'll rise from the deep sea into the open ocean, meaning that they can actually adapt to this sort of way of life. So they can thrive above the deep sea and down below. And once a female is pregnant, she'll even lay her eggs out in the shallow seas. And then once her babies hatch, they'll slowly move down into the deep sea. So she'll have many, many babies. Many babies. Hundreds of babies, so they can survive. So, you have the Scotorhyetus, which are strange photosynthetic Guran fish, I guess. Which, I mean, it's nice to see in the deep sea. Right. However, bioluminescence can be taken to the extreme, especially with the Retropox erythroforminus. I definitely pronounced that wrong, but I'm not good with this stuff. But this animal has used bioluminescence instead for communication, but now for hunting. They have developed a sac full of bioluminescent bacteria, which they developed a symbiotic relationship with. This allows them to lure in prey near their trunk jaw, mainly creatures like the Scotorhyetus, which can find it being very curious, and they can even flash it in order to mimic the communication of the Scotorhyetus. So they'll get very curious and wonder what's going on to go and try and investigate. And then they'll be sucked into the lower jaws, which, painful. Now, this obviously is very similar to that of, an earthly anglerfish. So they sort of convergently evolved with that, if you could say that. However, what's very interesting is breeding. Now, anglerfish on Earth, the male fuses with the female and becomes basically just a sack of sperm, constantly producing more and more of it to whenever the female wants, keeping him alive with her blood, which is parasitic, which is very bad. Well, it's not bad, but it's odd. However, these creatures do not do that. Instead, once they find a partner, they will begin to mate, obviously. However, the female will then leave, because the females are slightly bigger than the males, not as an anglerfish is, but they're still a little bigger, and the males are a little smaller. However, once the male gets done breeding, the female actually puts the egg sac in his fins. That's right, she puts the egg sac in his vestigial fins, mainly designed for holding egg sacs. So, he'll be the one to protect the eggs from the terrors of the deep sea. And he will not eat during any of this, only protecting him and his children that are developing within the eggs for safety. Due to this, it can cause him to get very old. Well, not really old, but die to starvation. However, it's usually around this time that the babies are born. And once the babies are born, the babies will be very, very hungry. And well, they got a fresh carcass right here to eat on, so they'll eat that. And that'll usually be enough for them to slowly grow and mature into their adult form, and grow their bioluminescent organ full of chemosynthetic bacteria. Which is, a grueling sight. Which is, very odd. But it's also seen on Earth here. With, well, the Scotoariatus being attracted, which can help them get off their photosynthetic bacteria, which is nice. However, this reproductive strategy is very similar to that of seahorses. Now, this reproductive strategy is called malonely parental care, which is when basically the male of a species is the one who protects the babies instead of the female, which is usually not the case in many species. So the male-only parental care is what these creatures exhibit. Again, very similar to that of an Earth seahorse. So, that's very interesting for these creatures. However, some other creatures are here. This strange, cluttering little critter is the very odd little guy. These odd-looking creatures are the Retropranix ithromanus. Wait a second, guys. Hold on. Give me a second. Okay, guys, I'm actually sorry about this, but I got the scientific names a bit wrong for the last creatures. These are the Retropranix ithromanus. I don't think I've ever gotten that on any gear light yet, which is a bit odd. I think I'm just adjusting to the new scientific names, I guess. I don't know, but don't worry. I'll add the real scientific names when I'm later editing this. I hope y'all forgive me. It's really late where I'm at, and I gotta go to school tomorrow, which is ugh. But these are the Retropox ithrominus. Guys, sorry. But these odd-looking creatures are also descendant from their open ocean counterparts, which burrowed through the dark, deep sea. Well, not really the open ocean, but it's still dark down here. And because of this, their ancestors already did not have good vision. So these guys were like, you know what? Let's not do vision at all. So they do not have eyes. Instead, they're blind. Which, is kind of weird. But their appearance is also similar to their ancestors. Very similar to that of, a mole or a talbot. So, they can dig underground and feed upon small aquatic worms that may be down there, as well as anything else that could be down there, as well as marine snow and the larvae of other species, which could be down there, which, look, creepy. Now, these are the preferred prey of the Photoscotus, which can sense their nervous system. So they'll have to be quick with their burrowing so they don't get attacked. They also have a pretty keen sense of smell and use that in order to seek out carcasses that then they can eat with their strong beaks and claws to scrape into the carcass. Creepy. So, you got creepy little deep sea moles. Cool. However, a very interesting creature is slowly moving, or not moving at all, in the deep sea. The rubro prehensor. The rubro prehensor is a very strange creature, might I say. Now, their ancestors were also in the reefs as the strange clam-like ancestors that used their legs to slowly drag themselves along, while their back pair limbs fused into the shell, providing them protection, as they were also closely related to the Guran turtles, as they're called. Now, these creatures are very similar to that of the giant clams of Earth, and that they don't really move, per se. Instead, are mostly sessile. Somewhat. Mainly in their larva stage are they more mobile. But as adults, not really. Now, these odd creatures have also developed a very large shell, and obviously, they've got weird hands. They've got long arms with long webs, and they stick this out of the water while a second pair of arm holds it open. They switch between arms each time they catch something in their webbing. That's right, they have their web stretched out for when small fish-like creatures swim near it, they can ensnare them and grab them, and pull them down in their shell to be eaten by a beak beneath, which is scary, as these creatures also do not have eyes and are blind. And they switch between arms when this happens. And that's, creepy. Now, you might be wondering, well, this bright red thing in the middle of the ocean would probably be seen by these creatures. Which, in the open ocean, oh yeah, you'd be right. These animals would indeed see this. However, we're in the deep sea. The deep sea wavelengths do not penetrate far enough down there in order to be seen and gotten. This means that these creatures are basically invisible to many deep sea animals, so they cannot see that. Which means that it's basically an invisible trap that gets grabbed by these animals. And their webbing is so strong and flexible that it can basically not tear. It's like a thick rubber. Which is, scary. Pulling it down into the pristine beak. They also reproduce via broadcast spawning, which is not the most efficient, but it works for these creatures so far, which is weird because they used to do sexual reproduction. Not anymore. And, they're kind of creepy, sometimes even making strange sounds to communicate across the deep sea. Take a listen. So yeah, they're kind of odd creatures that just kind of exist down here in the deep sea. Which, odd. However, slithering near all of these strange creatures is the Atopovermis. The Atopovermis is an odd worm-like creature. Now, very similar to their ancestors, they still use their top pairs of tentacles to slowly scrape at morsels of marine snow and any other junky food that they can find. However, unlike their ancestors, which were herbivores, these animals are not really herbivores. They'll feed upon anything, and that includes scraping flesh off of bones, which they do. The Apatovermis, similarly, are very dark purple to blend in with the darkness of the deep sea. However, if they are spotted, they will attempt to burrow. However, if it's too late for them to burrow, they'll use their long tail to whip and hit prey, or not prey, but predators in the eyes, disorienting them. Or if it's not the eyes that they hit, it's somewhere near the face, which can cause them to overreact because it's high senses. So then they can burrow and get away. So they can escape any predators that attempt to snaggle them up and turn them into a meal. Which is, kind of creepy here in the deep sea. And very similar to many species, they no longer have blue blood, but instead are equipped with purple blood. Which is, kind of strange, meaning that the only reason that they get their dark purple color is from their blood. And if they didn't have blood in them, they'd be transparent, which is, kind of cool, I guess. However, the apex predator of the deep sea, slowly slithering through this darkness of the darkest of the depths, is the Ruber Bestia. The Ruber Bestia is the apex predator of the deep sea. Now, this is a very, very strange, serpentine-like predator. Now, these creatures are more similar to that of the black dragonfish of Earth, and instead they're a deep, dark maroon color, in order to be invisible, essentially, since red light does not appear since. This also means that these creatures can detect red light wavelengths with their eyes, which is not very seen among deep sea animals, but they can do it. They have a sharp teeth on each tip of their mouth, so biting is a very painful thing. They also have bioluminescent skin cells near their base. This mimics many of the bioluminescent species that are down here, with a sort of false language, which can confuse creatures into coming near. And then, boom, they're snatched up. They can also use this to communicate to other members of their species, mainly towards mating season, which is nice. However, females eat the males after mating season, which is kind of similar to a praying mantis. These creatures are also one of the longest of the serpentine tube-body descendants, which is are not tube-body descendants, but the tripod worm's descendants. Hope I haven't been saying two bodies for the tripod worm's descendants. Hopefully not, but let's see. Now, these creatures are, of course, the apex predator, and, well, imagine in the deep sea and you see a long, snake-like creature with its mouth open, eating a small, fish-like creature on an alien world. That'd be pretty cool, actually. However, in the deep sea, there is something that's been brewing, and that is the buildup of carcasses from large animals above. These are dubbed whale falls and occur in Gura's, of course, deep sea. This occurs when large animals like webbed mouths die, as well as the glidiostomatid. When they die, their bodies sink down in the deep sea and become food for unique forms of life. Their carcass will sink down here and their flesh will rot. And many species come here to feed. Many species we've been talking about all been coming here to feed upon this deep sea oasis. However, some are specialized for this. One of which is the osteophagus. The osteophagus is a very strange creature. Now, these creatures have taken up the niche of bone eater, very similar to the bone-eating worms of Earth. They feed upon bones and also eat the marrow inside. Now, these creatures, their ancestors and cousins, are parasites. Even some representatives in the freshwater ecosystem, similar to leeches, drinking blood. However, these guys, they don't drink blood. They eat bones and rotting flesh of the carcasses that drift down here. And you can often find swarms of them swimming around and feeding upon the rotting carcass, like deep sea maggots. It's kind of gross, but for them, this is life. So their original scissor-like mouth parts, designed for cutting and then drinking blood, is now designed for cracking through bone. Oof, creepy. So, you have bone-eating worm-like creatures thriving within the deep sea. Oof, creepy. So, while basically all species we've covered so far in the deep sea will come to a whale carcass, or webbed carcass, they will, of course come with it, but these guys will feed upon the bones. So leave it to them to eat bones. Odd. However, hydrothermal vents are still pushing and moving strong through the deep sea, and have been providing nutrients for countless species of bacteria. And of course, some species need to eat bacteria, and some others do other things. This is the puffy tubus. The puffy tubus is a type of tube body. Now, these tube bodies actually descend from species of bristle tube bodies that were in the reefs. They've turned their bristles. Instead of being bristles, they are now feather-like plume structures that are equipped with bacteria for doing chemosynthesis, allowing them for efficient feeding, meaning that they don't really have a stomach anymore at this point, which is very odd, but it's not unlike that of the tube worms of Earth, which very similarly look like the puffy tubus on Gura. So they've sort of converged. And they're actually relatively big. Not as big as a Titan tube body or a tree tube, but they're still relatively large. You might not see it, but they're pretty big. And they're very puffy. Their larvae are actually pretty complex. Their larvae are big and grub-like, and have sort of taken up inspirations from the pupa stage as well, as the larvae no longer free swim, as they could be easy meal. So now the larvae swim, and the pupa are no longer really a pupa, but instead they're a cocoon that will then emerge into an adult. As larvae, they feed upon marine snow and bacterial mats, slowly building up enough nutrients to form a cocoon, and then into the adults. Which is, nice. And they also have a deep purple color, so if predators are coming near, they will think that it is a apatovermis, so they don't want to get whipped by the tail. So they'll most likely leave it alone. And if they do attempt to eat it, the larvae can quickly dig into the soil and survive. However, a very unique creature is slithering through here. This is the Serpens erythoosteotherminae. Now, this creature is actually a descendant of the ancestral tube bodies. That's right, it is a descendant of the ancestral tube bodies. So, the ancestral tube bodies have not yet gone extinct, while their numbers are definitely low, similar to the trilobites after the end Devonian extinction. It's not a lot, but it's still somewhat there. So they're pretty rare, but they're still here. And they've had a still rare descendant in the deep sea, but while they're rare, they can be found. And that is the Serpens erythoosteotherma. Now, these creatures have a bright red color in order to basically be invisible and not be seen by any predators that might be near. They suck up marine snow and eat bacterial mats, similar to the puffy tubus's larvae. They will also feed on puffy tubus's larvae whenever they get the chance, making them a sort of minor predator, as the tube bodies were always sort of predators. And they can also even feed upon the slower, not walking roots of the Abuna longinus, which is nice for these newer tube bodies, which is nice. So, it's good to see that some tube bodies are still doing it. While their numbers are very low, similar to the trilobites of Earth, it's good to see that they're still here. However, a very strange creature swims near these hydrothermal vents. The Phatanisner erythus is a strange predator that is contending for the apex predator niche with the rubberbestia. These animals are descended from the tentacle beak, which still do exist in the open ocean. Now, these creatures, they're kind of strange looking. Now, their front pair of tentacles have become long and now drag along the seabed. So if they feel any serpents, erythrostoria, or puff tubus larvae, or any small creature that might be near, they'll quickly wrap around it and bring it up and eat it with their strong beaks. Their back pair of tentacles used for great kicking, allowing them to swim through the water. Now, they get their name the Fantaea, which is derived from phantom, because they are transparent. Their skin is transparent in order to basically not create an outline or shadow. So, if you look, you can actually see these creatures' organs in their odd two stomachs, which is kind of cool. And you can even see their brain, which is kind of nasty, but that's pretty cool. And with that, we finally end it here with Gura episode 6. And well, I actually had a pretty good decent time with this video, and I'm sorry it didn't come out as long as I wanted it to, but I'm just glad it finally came out. And well, for the next episode, we're going to be talking about the open plains.